Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Not Another Mindset Show. Today, we are talking about the 7 principles of persuasion. And these 7 principles are outlined by Dr. Robert Cialdini? I'm not really entirely sure how to say his last name. Maybe that's something I should have looked up beforehand, but we'll call him Dr. Robert and make it easy on me here. And this book that Dr. Robert wrote was all about the 7 principles. And I actually think it used to be 6 principles and then he added some. There's been many variations of this book over the years. It's a best-selling book. If you have not heard of it before, I really encourage you to dive in and read it. I read it probably like 5 years ago. And I still, to this day, think about what I read in that book, hence me creating an entire podcast episode on it. So the book itself is called Influence. I believe it's Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion is sort of like the subtitle. I will link it in the show notes so you can go ahead and check it out, grab it if you want to. Like I said, definitely one worth reading. That said, today I'm going to give you somewhat of like a synopsis, I guess, because we're going to walk through the 7 principles that Dr. Robert talks about inside his book, but specifically apply it to a health and fitness coaching context with like some direct examples. And I will walk through each one of these principles, talking about the psychological concepts that go along with it, and also a little bit of just like neuroscience, I guess, like why this certain principle makes sense from how your brain works. So we're going to talk about those things. I pulled in these psychological concepts sort of just based on what I teach inside the health mindset coaching certification, just what I know from my own research in psychology and just spending a lot of time in that space. So yeah, let's dive in with principle number 1, which is reciprocity. So this is essentially just the idea that people tend to feel obligated to return favors. And although like obligation, I feel like obligation tends to have a little bit of like a negative context. Like I feel obligated to do something, meaning I feel like I have to do something even though I don't necessarily want to do it, though I'm not sure that's always entirely the case when it comes to reciprocity. Sure, there are definitely times where it's like, oh, this person did this thing for me and now I feel like I have to do this other thing for them. Like I just feel like I have to do it even though I don't necessarily want to. But it doesn't always have to be that way, right? Like there are definitely circumstances where we feel like we want to do something for someone else because they've done things for us. And this is really like a norm of human behavior. So this is like psychological concept number 1 related to the law of reciprocity, or I guess the principle of reciprocity, is that we have like this social expectation. I guess this is more like sociology than it is psychology because we're talking about like groups and social settings. And it's this expectation that favors should be returned. Like it's just kind of like a social thing that we understand without saying it out loud as humans. And there's also something called the social exchange theory that essentially it's a theory that dictates how relationships are established. And a big part of that is based on like perceived cost and benefits, right? So we maintain relationships with people based on our perception of what we're getting from them, what we're giving to them, and what it's costing us, but also what we're getting out of it. And a lot of that has to do with reciprocity, right? Like, am I pouring into my relationship with this person as much as they are giving back to me? It's something that we are kind of unconsciously, subconsciously evaluating all of the time. And this happens inside coaching relationships too, right? Like I can't tell you the number of times I've spoken with both clients and with coaches, and they're both having the same exact conversation and saying the same things, right? Like, oh, I just feel like I'm giving so much and I'm not getting anything back, or I'm getting less than what I am giving, right? So to balance that inside a coaching relationship is very important. We want it to feel like we are giving. Honestly, we should be doing our best to over deliver to our clients, because in doing so, the principle of reciprocity says, and this social norm that we have says, that they will give back to us. And typically that means by way of like sharing things with us, not leaving check-ins unread, not like ghosting us for periods of time, right? So we can kind of work with that in our favor. And from a neuroscience perspective, kind of how this works in our brains is that we have certain brain regions, specifically like the striatum, that I'm just like not pronouncing words correctly. Striatum. Now I'm like second guessing myself. I know this word. I'm like psyching myself out.
Okay, I got to take a quick pause here to talk to you about something very important. Your coaching forms, like your application form, check-in forms, intake forms. You, my friend, are probably missing out on a huge opportunity here because most coaches see these forms as nothing but information gatherers. And I'm here to tell you, they should be doing so much more for you. Your coaching forms should be helping your clients shift their mindset and make behavior changes that actually last. And your forms really do have the power to do that. And I want to show you exactly how inside my recently updated and upgraded DIY workshop mini series, Transform Your Forms. This DIY program is a short series of video trainings from me where you'll learn exactly how to use the science of mindset and behavior change in your coaching forms. So yes, we're talking application form, intake forms, check-in forms, and we'll even dive into your sales calls and exit surveys. This is the easiest, fastest, and most affordable way to start including science-backed strategies into your coaching practices. So it's no wonder Transform Your Forms is actually my most popular DIY program. And now with these new updates, it's even better than ever. Over 700 coaches have already picked up this workshop series. Check out the link in the show notes to learn more.
Anyway, there are certain brain regions that are activated when we receive gifts. And when those brain regions are activated when we receive gifts, that leads to enhanced feelings of obligation. So we can actually see this showing up in our brains, which is wild. So when it comes to a coaching context outside of the reciprocity in the relationship that I was speaking to before, there's other things, when I think a lot about like marketing in this context. So when you're giving away free resources, you're doing free webinars, to be honest, this podcast, like I'm giving away a lot of information. I'm spending a lot of time and effort to teach you all for free about the science of mindset, psychology, and behavior change. And I would be lying if I were to say I didn't hope that doing all of this for you does come back to me, right? This is an opportunity for me to share and teach and love on all of you. And I would love to see that translate into people trusting me more, being more interested in my content, and leading to helping me grow the business because people are able to connect with me more on this platform, learn from me, trust me, and then decide, you know what? I am ready to join the health mindset coaching certification and learn even more from Kasey. So those are some examples of how reciprocity, this principle of persuasion, this social norm can show up. Which then brings us to principle number 2, which is commitment and consistency. And I actually think this is one of the principles that was added later in Dr. Robert's book. He added, and this is essentially the idea that people are more likely to follow through on something if they have committed to it in a public manner. And that doesn't mean, getting on your Instagram and saying like, I'm going to lose 100 pounds this year. Like that's definitely an example, but it doesn't have to be like, I think when people hear like public commitment, it's like, go tell the masses that this is something that you want to do and you're committing to it. It doesn't have to be that way. It could literally be signing up to work with a coach and talking with that coach about your goals and saying like, I'm committed to doing this. But the more people commit publicly in some form or fashion, again, to their goals, the more likely they are to have follow through because humans like to stay consistent. So when we say, I'm going to do this, we like to follow through with it because we like to stay consistent because that feels good to us. So some psychological concepts that are related to this, the biggest one that came to mind for me is cognitive dissonance. This is the idea that it doesn't feel good. We kind of feel this like sense of friction when we do things, when our actions are not in alignment with our values, with our goals, with the things that we say we're going to do. So your clients are often experiencing cognitive dissonance when they say, I want to lose weight, I want to track macros, I want to stick to the plan. And then they have a weekend where they blow that all off and they go way overboard on food, they don't exercise, whatever. They feel guilty because they made a commitment and they are no longer staying consistent with that commitment. And that is where cognitive dissonance is born. So, in addition to that, what I've already talked about is like this desire for self-consistency. It is something that we really do desire and we want to feel as humans. So, when people are generally just like striving to maintain this consistency in their beliefs and their behaviors, essentially it's like the opposite of cognitive dissonance, right? Like we're striving for the opposite of that. And from a neuroscience perspective, we know that consistent behaviors, so things when we're doing things that are in alignment with our goals, our beliefs, our values, leads to positive reinforcement in the brain, which therefore encourages adherence, because when we feel good, we chase that feel good feeling and we want to be more adherent in the future. So, some examples of how this could look. I think it's like some of it's pretty obvious, right? Like so much of what we do as health and fitness coaches is help people make commitments and stay consistent to those commitments. And obviously, as a coach, better understanding of human behavior, decision making, self-sabotage, psychology, all of that stuff. If you can better understand why people aren't able to stay consistent with their commitments and you can better help them to become more consistent, that's going to feel better for them. It's going to have this really solid positive feedback loop to their adherence to the plan and therefore their success. So first and foremost, please learn about how humans work. And that's exactly what you're doing here on the podcast. So bravo, you're taking that step for sure. But when it comes to more like tangible stuff, even just thinking about like your application forms, your intake forms, your check-in forms, are you asking questions that actually help people make commitments to themselves, to you, to the coaching relationship, and then also kind of like following up on their consistency with those things? And I'm going to very shamelessly plug a specific program that I have. It's one of my DIY offers. I actually, in the past few months, have recently revamped the entire thing and turned it into a mini series versus it being just like one big fat, like hour and a half long talk. So it is polished up and some new content has been added into it as well. It's called Transform Your Forms. We've had, I think, over 1,000 coaches go through Transform Your Forms. It's my most popular workshop that I have, like DIY program. So I am going to link it here because it is perfect for this, because I'm literally in Transform Your Forms talking about how to increase commitment and consistency, which is just so perfect for all of this, inside your intake forms, application forms, check-in forms, sales calls, things like that. So you can use that from a like psychology of persuasion perspective. I almost don't want to say it that way though, because we're not really trying to persuade people to make commitments and stay consistent. We're just trying to help them like uncover their own values and the things that they already have inside of them. And that's what you can do inside Transform Your Form. So I'll make sure that that is linked below, because we talk about like very specific questions and all of that to add into your forms to help with this. Other things, accountability challenges within like your client community groups, like bringing all of your clients together to like commit to doing something for a month and supporting each other through that. It's a really, really great way to foster commitment, consistency, and also community. Look at that, 3 C's. An example that we've done inside my coaching business in the past was something called Lift Miss. And actually, as I'm recording this, it is December and we are approaching Christmas. And I know it is very much not December as you're listening to this episode. But we went batching content like crazy at the end of the year. So here we are. But we've done something called Lift Miss in the past, where inside our community space for all of our clients, we ran this challenge. And throughout the month, clients would post videos of themselves exercising in some way. It could be a video of them doing squats, outside running, whatever. And the goal was like as many times as possible through the month of December, post a video of you working out. And what was great too is that then the coaches could come in and help people with their form if they had questions on certain things. So we kind of like doubled it up as a way for them to give back to, see how this works. Reciprocity is coming into play too. It's like you post a video and we will help you with your form in exchange, and then also win prizes. So the people who posted the most amount of videos in the month of December were the ones who would win prizes in the end. So really great way to foster commitment, accountability, community, the 3 C's, and a little bit of reciprocity as well. All right, principle number 3 is social proof. Social proof is talked about so much, especially when we're talking like business, right? Like testimonials, client stories, transformations, that sort of thing. But with this principle of persuasion specifically, we're looking at the fact that people look to others to determine how to behave, especially in like uncertain situations. Like we're always looking to other people. And you have all felt this way before, right? You know, you're on the airplane and there's like a lot of turbulence all of a sudden and like it's getting a little scary. What do? You like look around to see how other people are responding to help you decide how you're going to respond. We look to other people all the time to determine our own perceptions. And the psychological concepts that are related to this are so many, but the first couple that came to mind for me were, number one, conformity. Like we just tend to conform to what the rest of the group is doing, and we align our actions to group behaviors. You know, when you're sitting at a group dinner and you're thinking like, okay, I'm going to order the salad. That's what I'm going to do. And then every single other person who orders before you got like a burger and fries. I mean, a lot of you will probably still order the salad, right? It probably depends on the people that you're around and things like that too. But that's what a situation our clients are in a lot, right? So better understanding how that works and also sharing with them how that works is really helpful, because then it becomes like, hey, this is kind of just like what we want to do as humans, because we want to stay like as part of the group, because it's almost like a really like ancient safety mechanism that we have. Because I think we all know if you still order the salad, even though everyone else got a burger and fries, you're not going to get kicked out of the group. However, there is that, like I said, ancient mechanism in our brains that is like, no, you must conform. You must be like everyone else, otherwise you're going to be exiled. Like that does happen in our brains. So that, and also just like herd behavior, which is very like we're basically talking about the same things here, right? Like people like to follow the crowd, and especially in like ambiguous situations, like we don't know what we're doing, we don't know what we're supposed to do, where to go, whatever, you just follow everybody else. This is where we like our sheep in that regard. From a neuroscience perspective, observing other people actually activates similar neuro pathways in our own brains, which then prompts imitation. And this is mirror neurons that does this. So that's what we're looking at from a neuroscience perspective. So when we see other people do things, we actually have similar areas in our brain lighting up to imitate what they're doing. And that's just, man, humans are so funny. It's clearly like again, like a protective mechanism, right? Because if we follow what everyone else is doing, the chances of our survival is likely higher. But then it begs the question, you know, if they jump off a bridge, will you do it too? And that's where we run into issues, right? Is like people just following along or just doing what other people do. Like those kids on the streets with their drugs, like don't do drugs, but if all my friends are doing it now, I want to do it too. But that all comes into play where it can be positive and negative that we are wired this way, right? So bringing it to like coaching practices here, what we're actually talking about, showcasing client success stories can be so important, and not just like before and after photos, like the actual story of the person. Help people see themselves in your current clients so that they can feel like, oh, I can do it too. I can feel just like that person. I can be just like that person. But you need to tell the story and not just like show a before and after photo. That can still help. But if you can get a little bit deeper and like, this is how this person was feeling when they came to me. Here's what we did together. Here's where we are now. Here's where we're going to go. Like that can be really helpful. And also just like communities, like building communities inside with your clients, a place where you share wins and you share progress so that everyone feels like, oh, we're all kind of like in this together. They're sharing wins. That means I'm going to have wins too. And then I'm going to share. Also, again, reciprocity kind of coming back, and same thing with like commitment, right? Like every single one of these all end up kind of like combining. But when others are sharing wins and sharing progress, that makes other clients feel like, oh, I feel like I should do that too because that person was vulnerable and willing to share, so I'm going to do it also. So, and of course, like you can be the one who kind of like kicks off a lot of that stuff inside your communities as well. All right, principle number 4 is the principle of authority. So we all know this. You all know all of these, but we're just going a little bit deeper. People tend to trust and follow the advice of people that seem like they're credible sources. Honestly, this might be exactly why you're sitting here listening to this podcast right now. I would really hope you see me as a credible source. And that's why you are willing to listen to me for minutes and minutes on end, sometimes hours on end, if you're, going binging multiple episodes here. So, psychological concepts involved here. You may have heard of the halo effect before, but it's this tendency that we have as humans to essentially assume that someone who has a positive trait likely has other positive traits too. So if I am an expert in mindset and behavior change, you may likely assume that I have expertise in other things too. So that is the halo effect. We also just have a general trust in authority figures and are more likely to comply when someone seems like they are an authority. If we walk down the street right now and someone is wearing a police uniform, whether they are actually a policeman or not, if they stop us to ask us a question, we're probably more likely to comply than if it was someone who was just in plain clothes, right? And that is just building on this idea of trust in authority figures. And obviously there's a lot of people in this world that do abuse that, and that's very unfortunate. There's actually, I didn't even write this down, but I'm just remembering this. There is a study, I think a couple studies, that were looking at this idea of authority figures and people trusting authority figures just kind of blindly. And people were delivering information in a white coat, like a white lab coat. And that information was seen as more trustworthy than someone who wasn't wearing the white coat. So again, please don't like abuse this information. Now I see like everybody showing up with white coats on their Instagram reels, but it's the truth, right? And from a neuroscience perspective, we actually have brain regions that are associated with trust and credibility, and those are activated when we're hearing from experts, and we have like an enhanced amount of receptivity because of that. So we're more likely to listen and like lean in and pay attention when it's coming from someone that we see as like an expert or an authority. So how do you use this without putting on a white coat or wearing like a stethoscope, wearing a police badge in your Instagram reels when you're teaching? Is number one, like if you're not displaying your certifications and your qualifications prominently, like please do. Please do. Please don't shy away from doing that. I actually have one of my best friends, Emily, if you're listening to this, she will be like, oh, don't put me on the spot. She has a master's degree in physique enhancement, and she is a online coach. And she, for the longest time, has not had MS, like actually showcasing her master's degree in her Instagram bio. And I'm like, honey, what are you doing? And she's like, I don't know. I'm like, no, you need to, number one, be proud of your accomplishments. And number two, like that really helps you. People see you as an expert. They see that you know what you're talking about because you do. Also, doing things like hosting workshops, webinars, getting on podcasts, things like that, where you can actually showcase your expertise. Like I can tell you right away that when people hear me say that I've been on over 100 different podcast shows as a guest, they're like, oh my God, you must be an expert, right? Like no one's actually saying that, but you know that that's what they're taking away from that. And I mean, it is true. I have a really strong expertise in a very specific area. And that is just like the podcasts then are a byproduct of that expertise, but it also enhances the expertise, right? It showcases it. So think of essentially more ways that you can, for lack of a better word, like flaunt your authority, because y'all earned it, right? Like my health mindset coaching certified students, I'm on them about making sure that they're telling their clients and they're using that and they're leveraging it in their content and talking about the fact that they went through this like 13-week program to learn more about behavior change and mindset. And that sets them apart from other coaches who are saying that they're mindset coaches, but don't really have any formal training or education. So that is the principle of authority. Next is principle number 5, which is liking. People are more likely to be influenced by those that they like and relate to. And I'm using the word influence very specifically here because we have a lot of influencers out there. There's actually, literally, you all know this, like $1 billion industry of people that their job is literally to be liked and to have others relate to them so that they can then sell their favorite products to those people. Welcome to the world of influencing. I actually learned the other day that when you're asking, who said this? I think it was like on a podcast that I was listening to. Like you ask like kindergartners or elementary school kids what they want to be when they grow up. And so many of them now these days are saying that they want to be influencers when they grow up. It's crazy. What a world we live in. So psychological concepts related to this is this like principle of affinity that we have. People are drawn to those that they see they have similarities with or they see are likable by other people. Again, kind of coming back to the influencer thing, you see someone who has 300,000 followers, you're like, wow, a lot of people like this person. So immediately you are more influenced by that person than someone who has 300 followers. And that is just unfortunately the way that we work, because that metric we see as a metric of like that person's more likable. So similarities are important too. And like, this is, I'm not saying you need to go out there and buy a bunch of followers or do any of that nonsense, but instead think about how you can be more likable. Like, I'm sure you are likable. Listen, you are likable, my friend. You're likable, but how are you actually showcasing it, right? And that's actually something I have to remind myself a lot about on social media and things like that, because I'm truly, guys, like I am pretty burnt out on showing up on social media. I've been doing it for like over a decade, and I find myself like very averse to like getting on my Instagram stories and talking and like showing my life as much as I used to. But I have to remind myself that like, that's how I get other people to like me, as weird as that sounds, and just feel like they can relate to me and get to know who I am. Like no one's going to like you if they don't know who you are, right? It's like, just like the basics of it. And also just like the importance of social bonds, personal connections. We know that if you have a bond with someone, you feel connected to someone, you're going to trust them more. That's just, point blank. And from a neuroscience perspective, positive interactions do release dopamine. And so when we know we're going into another positive interaction or we're anticipating that's when dopamine is released. It's like the anticipation of the reward, and then that creates a desire for more connection and kind of this like feedback loop. So examples in the health and fitness coaching space, obviously with your clients, like you're not just someone to prescribe macros and write a workout plan. You're another human connecting with another human. And to be honest, there's a lot of coaches out there. One way that you get to stand apart and attract your ideal client is to be yourself and to allow other people to see similarities in themselves with you and relate to you. And that is often the reason someone would hire you over hiring someone else, especially if we're talking about like skill sets and everything even, which happens a lot, right? There's a lot of really skilled coaches out there. So this is one way for you to stand out. And something to just very much so keep top of mind when you are interacting with your current clients. A lot of times when I'm talking to coaches who feel like their clients are leaving before they're actually ready, like right after the minimum commitment or something like that, a lot of it boils down to like that lack of trust and connection and bonding. So big, important stuff there. Okay, principle number 6 is scarcity. People are motivated by the thought of losing something far more than they are motivated by the idea of gaining something. The principle that immediately comes to mind for me from like a psychological perspective connecting to scarcity is loss aversion. Like we are so worried about losing things. Like if you were to lose $100, that often feels worse than finding $100. Like, oh, I thought I had that $100 in my wallet, $100 bill in my wallet. I must have left it on the table when I was taking everything out and trying to find that one credit card, whatever. That feels a lot worse than if we're like, oh, wow, I found $100 on the street. And that is a big part in like decision-making processes too. Like how you feel about losing something versus like gaining something, and in general too, like perceived scarcity, like if we feel like there's only so much of something or we're running out of time or whatever, increases desirability. Like if there's a sale or a promotion going on, whether it's you doing that inside your own business or you see it somewhere else, like that perceived sense of like, oh my God, I need to act on this now, obviously, right? Because it's going away. And from a neuroscience perspective, we're actually talking a lot about like your amygdala, which is the area related to like emotional responses and often fear. So your amygdala is what responds to this fear of loss. And this is like your midbrain region. It's kind of like amygdala is like almost part like reptilian brain, like just like emotional responses, again, just like related to safety and security. So it all makes sense. It all makes a lot of sense. So when it comes to your coaching business, scarcity can work really well from a marketing perspective, but please do so ethically. If you don't actually have only 5 spots left on your coaching roster, please do not lie about it and say that you do just for the sake of leveraging scarcity. Stay within ethical standards, have morals, please. But if it's the truth, then you should be leveraging it, right? Some girls inside the Growth Collective, which is my one-on-one mentorship program, like business mindset combination, call it a mastermind. I don't, because it's a very small group, very intimate, very hands-on, like one-on-one work with me. But inside that group, there's many times when there are things going on inside the girls' business, something like a price increase, right? Like, oh, I'm planning to increase my prices in 2025. Like it's due time, like it's been years, whatever. And I'm like, great. Have you talked about this yet? And they're like, no, why would I talk about it? Like, this is a great opportunity for you to say, this is your last chance to get these prices before we increase. And they're like, oh yeah, you're right. So like, also just think about stuff that's going on inside your business, things that are going away, things that are changing, things that are coming that you can leverage in this capacity too. The health mindset coaching certification is a great example of us using scarcity because we only open enrollment 2 times per year. So at this point, when you're listening to this episode, we just wrapped up our spring enrollment and we will not be opening again until much later in the year. So there's a lot of scarcity at play that you really can only get in a couple times per year. And we also can't take all of the students in the world. So we have to be like mindful of how large our cohort sizes are. And yeah, scarcity works well, but just please use it the correct way. All right. Our final principle is unity. People are influenced by those who they perceive as part of their like in group. Like you're my people, you know? So people are more influenced by those that they see themselves in. This is kind of related to half of the principles that I've already talked about, but psychological concepts involved here. Number 1 is social identity theory, because people tend to define themselves by the groups that they're part of. So I was like, am I wearing this sweatshirt? For those of you who are not on YouTube, I'm wearing a McLaren Formula One sweatshirt as I sit here. And I identify myself as a Formula One girly, right? I'm a Formula One fan. So if I were to go out with friends on the weekend and meet people who maybe someone, actually this happened. This doesn't even have to be a made up example. I was at a cocktail bar with some girlfriends, and I walked by a guy who was wearing what was it? I think it was an Alfa Romeo Formula One hat. And I walked up to him and was like, I like your hat. They're not doing so well this season. And we kind of like started chatting, whatever. And we had a great conversation for like 30 minutes about Formula One. And in those circumstances, when you find someone who you feel like is like part of your in-group, now, if that person was like, hey, there's this specific bar you guys need to go to tonight, or like, we went to this great restaurant, you're going to love it. Now I feel like this person and I are like in the same group, and I would take what he has to say as something I should actually pay attention to because of that, even if they're unrelated concepts, right? So we do that. And it's also kind of related to, I talked about this in a whole episode. It's the ABCs episode. What did I actually call it? I'll make sure it's linked in the show notes. I think it's called the ABCs of behavior change. Either way, it'll be linked in the show notes if you want to dive into it more. And the B of the ABCs is belongingness. And this is a fundamental, basic psychological needs that all human beings have. Psychological need, rather, that all human beings have. And it drives the desire for connection and like loyalty to other people. So it's autonomy, belongingness, and competence are the ABCs. Again, I have a full episode on that. That's a big reason why unity might be a principle of persuasion, because we care so much about belonging to a group, to other people, to fostering community. You can see again where we're kind of pulling in the other principles here. And from a neuroscience perspective here, there are brain areas that are related to social bonding specifically that do activate when people feel more connected to a group. So there are specific parts of your brain that are essentially lighting up, for lack of a better term there, that light up specifically when we are feeling connected to a group. And some examples now, obviously, I think we've talked about a handful of them that could kind of apply here already, but implementing group challenges to foster more unity amongst your clients. Same thing if you're a business owner. Are there things that you could do amongst your team to help boost company culture through unity? Like, what does that look like? And maybe even think right now, do you feel like right now your team or your group of clients, there is a sense of unification? Everyone feels unified. How many different ways can I say the word unity? But just how important that is. And that's like, again, kind of going back to like the Formula One thing and just like sports in general, or like groups, or literally there's just like so many examples of where, like thinking like politics, like where unity, it becomes so important. It is just like embedded into why it is important to us, is because of unity, right? So if we can leverage that, again, not for the sake of persuasion, but because we know this is important to people, how can we leverage that? How can you create a group of clients that other people look in on and go, I want to be part of that because they feel so unified, and I want to feel like I belong in a group like that. So you can keep that in mind. You can even like do little things, like for instance, with my email list, I talk about it as the email club. It's the Mindset Monday email club. You get an email from me every single Monday with a little tidbit of information related to mindset when it comes to like research or thought exercises or what have you. And I call it a club. Like, you get to be part of my club. You get to you get insights and application, and you're the first to know if I have anything fun going on, any special promotions, things that other people don't get to hear about right away, but you do because you're part of the club, you know? So just ways that you can do that as well. You can think on that. All right. So that brings us to the end of the 7 principles of persuasion, how it kind of relates to health and fitness coaching context. I hope this was helpful. Please let me know. Please always reach out if you have anything to share, any insights, anything that came up for you. I love, 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 love connecting with all of you. But that is all I have for today, and I will see you next time.